Hello, everyone. Dr. Ames here. This time, I'd like to talk about some basic demographics about older workers and aging in the United States in general. A little history to start off with. Prior to 1850s, 1860s, the country was primarily agricultural, uh, and those people who were 65 years of age and older at that time wielded tremendous economic and political power in the country. Uh, of course, the Industrial Revolution had started before the 1850s and 60s and so forth, and would really about that one decade there was in full swing between 1850 and 1860. And we saw a change in people's lives as the country began to move quickly from an agrarian society to one based on manufacturing and factory life and very different types of jobs than they'd ever had it before. And so what we saw is that at this time, 1850s, 1860s, people 65 years of age and older were really only about 3% of the population. But because of the agrarian nature of the country up until about that time, they did have that tremendous political and economic power. But this changed as the country moved from the farm to the cities. And we saw a difference in values and attitudes towards older people. Older people's knowledge and experience prior to the move to the factories and to modern cities was valued and relied upon. Um, but between 1860 and 1920, America really moved quite decisively from agricultural to industry. Uh, and during this same time, we did have a societal shift on the value of older knowledge, knowledge of older people, and their experience, and their economic and political power consequently declined over this time. As people moved to the cities and began to embrace a new life with specific jobs, factory jobs mainly at the time, the need was for younger workers, stronger workers to keep up with the demanding pace of the factory life. And the factory pace was very high. It was physical. It was hard work. Um, and it was very demanding. And older workers simply couldn't cut it. Um, and of course, people didn't live as long at that time either in America. So to be over 65 was extremely senior for a lot of people. So we saw that people began to age, lose economic power, political power, and so forth. And we saw the rise and change in American society from agrarian to industrialized. And over time, up until about 1920, certainly, employers became very dependent on the younger workers and demanded younger workers because of the physical nature of the jobs themselves. Fewer older people were able to support themselves. They were much less economically productive in the new labor market that existed after the 1860s and so forth. It was a steady decline for them. So older workers came to have a physical um, disadvantage in the workplace, and as time progressed, they also had a technological disadvantage in the workplace. Remember, at this time in America and in most of society, Western society in general, there were no retirement plans, no pensions, there was no health care, there was no retirement or any type of employer provided support during or after your employment. So to be an older person by 1930s in America was often a life of poverty, a life of loneliness, and really having to deal with a lot of ageism. All those stereotypes about old people and the lack of respect that had once a group of people who commanded so much political and economic power was now gone. Things had changed. And as the population began to move to the cities where the jobs were, older people also became much more isolated, which is part of the loneliness factor. And certainly they had lost the influence that they did have with younger generations. Even when the first Social Security program came around in the 1930s, most people died before they ever got any benefits. And this was actually planned on and acknowledged before the plan was put into effect. The fact that the way that this plan could pay for itself was likely because most recipients proposed recipients of the aid would probably die long before they were able to get the benefits. And that is part of the problem today with Social Security and its financial solvency and so forth. Um, but really, when we look at it today from a contemporary viewpoint, we have to say, well, how old is old? Because people are living much longer than ever before. And the definitions vary according to the source. So let me give you some information here about what is old depending on the source. The ADEA, the American Disabilities Employment Act, says to be old is 40. Well, remember, that's the piece of legislation that says it's a crime to discriminate against a worker who is 40 years of age and older, whether it's in promotion or hiring or selection, whatever it might be. So the ADEA sets the law as legally you're old when you hit 40 because that's when the protections for older workers kick in. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, a government agency, says it's 55 when you're old. Research, according to the BLS, indicates that 55 is the age when certain workplace problems are noticed. For instance, technological disadvantages really kick in when you're that old. Your skills may become obsolescent. Getting training is harder for older workers in many companies and larger organizations. And getting that full-time job, getting rehired, is also hard. The census, the US Census, says that 65 is old. So already there are three different classifications of what is old. The ADEA at 40 years of age is old. Bureau of Labor Statistics says it's 55. The US Census counts old people beginning at 65 years of age. And then we have a fourth group that also defines age, and their opinion is certainly as valid as all the rest. This is gerontologists. And gerontologists are doctors who are really treating older people. So they have a classification which is really interesting. They say that we have the young old and we have the old old. And so they divide up older people into these two categories. If you're 65 to 75, you're in the young old category. And if you're older than 75, then you're in the old category. So that's according to the gerontologists. Now we look at some current demographics about older workers. Well, persons over 65 are currently about 13% of the population. There's about 40 million people 65 years of age or older in the US. The population rate is growing at 10%. So this group is actually growing at a 15% annual rate. So we are constantly seeing more older people every year. It's on the upswing. As you can see from this table, this is the difference of percent of population for older workers beginning in 1900 through 2000, 2010, and then the projection for 2050. Um, and really what we're seeing here is 4% in 1900 of the population was 65 or older. That was 1 in 25, only 3 million people. People aren't living as long in 1900. In 2000, that has tripled. 12%, or 1 in 8 people, are now 65 years of age and older, which is 35 million people, more than 10 times the amount. In 2010, just a 10-year versus a 100-year change, we've gone up 1% already. 1 in 7, 40 million people. The projection for 2050 is that 1 in every 5 people will be over 65 years of age in the US, or 25 or 20% of us. 88 million people is the projection here. And so what we do see, that this is skewed when it comes to gender because women live longer than men. If we look at the average lifespans, the Euro-American lives about 78. In 1900, it was 47. So you can see in the 1930s, when Social Security was set, that they didn't really expect people to live long enough to collect those benefits. But this lifespan is for Euro-Americans. Euro-American women live the longest, the 80 years of age. African-American men live the shortest at 45 years of age. When we look at the entire 65 plus age-old group of people in the country, there are only 74 men for every 100 women, so 1/4 less. That just shows you that women live so much longer. When we look at 20 years later, 85 plus years old group, there are only 46 men for every 100 women, so less than half. So men die younger. What we see is older women often die alone. Uh, Loneliness is a real problem for older Americans, particularly for older women. And consequently, poverty is also always a concern for these women. Any individual's lifespan is affected by your genetics and your environment and your lifestyle and your income and all of those many factors. Um, we look at some of the minority groups, we see that their percentages are slightly less than the overall growth of this group of older Americans. Asian Americans and Latino Americans are about 8% at 65 or older. African Americans and Native Americans are only about 65% of those who are 65 or older. Where do these people live? Well, the largest number of 65 plus years old people live in the South, followed by the Midwest and the West. The smallest proportion of older persons in the US live in the Northeast. When it comes to where is the population of older persons growing the most, it's in the West, and it's growing at a rate of 24%. When it comes to states where older people live, California has the most, followed by Florida and New York. And that's probably no surprise. That is, those are certainly the three most populous states. If we look at some census information, according to the 2010 census, 56% of people 65 years of age or older are married, so slightly more than half. 66% of those people live with a spouse or with some relatives, but 27%, slightly over one fourth, they live alone. 5% of those people live in group quarters, and 2% live with non-relatives. So that would have to be nursing homes and so forth. Okay, folks, that's all I wanted to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.